Warning. The system has become unstable.
Hey there, people of the internet. Welcome back for another installment of whatever it is we're doing here. It's Satan stuff. Okay. Hey, again, we're going to mix a little Satan stuff, politics, history, science. You know, why not? Let's get it all in there. Let's squeeze it all in there. All right. I'm going to be drawing from a essay that I did today called Satanic Pluralism and Marxist Diversity. So I've had a migraine for about 2 weeks now, and some days it's become rather debilitating. And last night I was awake every couple of hours. It was kind of torturous. Night before that, I got about 3 hours sleep. But somehow I was able to get this done. All right, so all right, let's get over here to the essay. So there are plenty of non-theistic and theistic first level / phase pseudo-Satanists that are rabidly hateful against outgroup religions and present a particular vitriolic obsession with Christianity. There are now hordes of disenfranchised others united as a collectivist activist coalition in Halloween fancy dress, defining itself as modern Satanism. That brand of the satanic left-hand path milieu is almost exclusively representative of the non-theistic denominations of contemporary religious Satanism. White Westerners and identifiable classes of individuals of westernized non-white populations disproportionately but not exclusively conquered and divided along the male-female binary are brazenly targeted in a top-down psyop terror campaign for a civilization I said it right better the first time, civilizational eradication and replacement by anti-religion, pseudo, and increasingly anti-scientific cultural Marxists. The Infernal tradition is a distinguishable instantiation of the Satanic movement. It was co-founded by me in 1987 and refined by me as its ideological spearhead of on an international scale between 1988 and 2003. It was reconstituted by me on September 1st in 2025. It is currently in the slow, independent, multimedia process of updating its theological or theosophical, small t, theories in relation to present-day cutting-edge science and its nearly one-for-one relevance to its initial examinations of science-based satanic religiosity. What I mean by that is very little has actually changed. The theories have remained staggeringly consistent. But, of course, what I was talking about 40 years ago and 35 years ago and 30 years ago and 25 years ago has been greatly updated. Go figure. So in the meantime, I am diligently presenting social media teasers that are heretofore found within the Infernal Order of the Left-Hand Path Facebook group. It's a private group, but it's a free group. It doesn't cost you anything. So if you're interested in the Infernal tradition, the Infernal Order of the Left-Hand Path, go to the Infernal Order of the Left-Hand Path Facebook group and join. People, please, for the love of God, okay? For the love of God, there are 3 questions. Answer the 3 questions, and you have to check the box that says you agree to the group rules. If you do not do those things, the admin assist, which I rely on greatly because I've deleted and banned about 4,000 people, that admin assist will automatically deny your membership request. I cannot override that. Now, if it doesn't allow something that you post, I can manually override that. But the membership request, I cannot. You'd have to go through the process again. By the way, another and these are parameters that I put in place. Another thing is, I forget. I think I said it at 12 months, but at 12, 18, or 24 months, if your profile of your account is newer than that, and I think it's 12 months, it's going to be automatically denied. Also, if you don't have a profile picture, it's going to be automatically denied. So I promise you, in whatever way we may interact, I'm not interested in wasting your time, so please don't waste my time. You'd be surprised at how many times I've had to go over this with people, and it's like, just follow these steps and you'll be fine. All right. Shameless plug. Okay, so in the meantime, I am diligently presenting social media teasers that are heretofore found within the Infernal Order of the Left-Hand Path Facebook group and WilliamGidneyMedium.com blog, with increasing utilization of the Infernal Paganism YouTube channel and brand new William Gidney Substack publication. All right. So, beginning as a non-theistic but science-driven form of what topical scholars refer to as reactive or reactionary Satanism, the Infernal tradition continues to uphold the pragmatic Aristotelian agnostic, deistic or deism presented in the Satanic Bible by my former high priest, the late Anton Szandor LaVey. So the Infernal tradition, therefore, continues to welcome self-identified non-theistic / atheistic Satanists as potential initiates, while scientifically acknowledging a higher intelligence comprehensible via the marriage of religious metaphor and the evidence revealed by quantum physics inter alia. A little Latin for you there. So, a little Latin dancing. Okay, a little salsa. All right, so in an inexhaustible investigation of the fine-tuning of the apparent design of our objective universe and individual monadic subjective universes, as well as our shared co-created reality, the Infernal tradition finds that an evidentiary inquiry into infinite regress reasonably concludes with the conscious agent generically called God, but that we generally invoke and evoke as Satan or Lucifer. The Infernal tradition long ago evolved beyond reactive Satanism and finds that within an objective universe, partially comprehensible pursuant field theory, that each human conscious agent / monad resonates with a distinctive frequency that explains our true diversity in religious, sex / gender, and racial terms. Okie dokie. So, we are therefore not bigoted against such identifiable classes of individuals. Simultaneously, we responsibly safeguard our respective and culturally collective existence by various means, to include reasonable social psychology, political science, and cultural anthropology-based situational awareness hypothesized from cross-cultural metadata pertinent to pattern recognition. Pattern recognition. You may have come across that on X.com, formerly known as Twitter, in which right now Europe and Ireland are all aflutter. Oh, Elon Musk. Oh, it's his fault. It's his fault. Oh, quit showing us reality. We want a consensus reality where we deny what we see with our own eyes. All right. As such, from its inception, the Infernal tradition has been a home for initiates of all races, both sexes, both sexes, and the gamut of sexual orientations. I should say, we encourage lawful conduct in that regard. Duh. Okay, so it is therefore a diverse monoculture, relevant to the American credo of e pluribus unum, out of / from many, one. E pluribus unum. Okay. So the Infernal tradition has always rejected the cultural Marxist social cancers of cultural relativism and multiculturalism. It has also always promulgated the value-added manifestation of American multiracial civic nationalism united under the unifying monoculture of Americanism, while likewise defending the traditional civilization state ethno-nationalism of countries like Japan, pre-war Germany, and the Arabic theocracy of Saudi Arabia. In other words, we don't promote toppling in the nation building. You people do you. Epigenetics is real. Okay, so it's nature and nurture. So you people do you, and we people will do us, and then the world's a better place for it. Okay, the American dream is an idea that can be adopted by all races within a strictly limited and thoroughly vetted immigration policy that legitimately fosters a multiracial monoculture of Americanism. Notably, Anton LaVey partially defined Satanism as Americanism, and subject to nuanced critiques, this was his essential argument. I want to pause here real quickly and do, I believe it's Ann Coulter, and there are others who will not get on board with supporting Vivek Ramaswamy in any of his political aspirations, whether it's a statewide office in his home state of Ohio or his prior presidential bid in the last presidential electoral cycle. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, there's a couple of things about him that I'm not particularly excited about, but I have read his books. I think his books are well worth reading. When he speaks, I've sort of gotten over it because I've heard him speak so many times. But initially, I was very happy to hear someone with such a command of the English language have a microphone, since we live in such a world of celebration of ignorance and stupidity. Stupidity is the first satanic sin, as we'll get back to here in a moment. He's also he's a first-generation American of Indian descent, and he is a practicing Hindu. Now, those last couple of things are really the big thing with his detractors. Now, I do concur with Ann Coulter in her thesis. I mean, it's a general thesis, but I think she really, stated it clearly in, I think it was Adios America, circa 2015, 2016, 2015, that it's a misnomer to say that we are a nation of immigrants. We are, in fact, a nation of settlers. This is not stolen land. This is conquered land. And for all of you people that are pro-America, pro-Western culture, pro-Western values, remember what that means, because our cultural rivals, our cultural enemies, our political rivals, our political enemies are eagerly and emphatically trying to displace us. And so don't boast about what our ancestors did in conquering with manifest destiny, because by hook or by crook, by guile and dishonesty and persuasion and Machiavellian tactics and stratagems, we could very easily be displaced. And then you know what? They'd have every right in a social Darwinist context to be saying to us in the future, it's not stolen land, people, it's conquered land. So if you value your freedom and you use that catchphrase, that bumper sticker phrase, be willing to stand for it, okay? So you stand for nothing or you'll fall for anything. Okay, so again, I said the American dream is an idea that can be adopted by all races within a strictly limited and thoroughly vetted immigration policy that legitimately fosters a multiracial monoculture of Americanism. Notably, Anton LaVey partially defines Satanism as Americanism, and subject to nuanced critiques, this was his essential argument. Ooh, that's scrolling the wrong gosh darn thing there, people. Next thing you know, cats and dogs and all right, so although such a stringently curated immigration policy can also positively add value to, for example, the German population, present day, it cannot transform an Ausländer, into a German, die Deutschen. For instance, when I was a resident of Germany as a soldier in 1989 and 1990, I was a lawful resident of that nation, but remained culturally and lawfully defined as an American citizen. Conversely, a culturally defined German citizen can indeed move to my country as an alien resident and then become an actual American citizen, American, citizen, as both a matter of law and cultural identity. What is diversity? One reasonable thought experiment to understand it relates to a visualized graph of self-sorting concentric circles representing in-group and out-group clusters. Normally, but not always, one's foundational in-group is their household nuclear family. That scales upward to include and exclude increasingly identifiable classes of individuals, such as a particular religious affiliation. Hence, a child is more socially inclusive by hypothetically expanding their tribe beyond their immediate familial clan so as to encompass their fellow, hypothetically here people, their fellow Pentecostal Christian church members. Yet, by doing so, they also thereby demonstrate highly specialized exclusion by self-sorting their Christian denomination from others like the Catholics, Baptists, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc. Und so weiter. Und so weiter. So now as relevant, continues scaling upward along further social lines of socioeconomic, racial/cultural, nationalistic, political party, and endless other variables. For instance, a black female American Mormon arguably has far more in common with a white female European Mormon than a black female Muslim in Somalia or Somalian in Minnesota. Of course, this self-sorting cultural reality is antithetical to the present popularity of the racial essentialism of race-based communist indoctrination. True, we can go down an equally irrational rabbit hole of adjacent intersectional theory, but suffice it to say for here that such pseudo-social science is also amusingly, albeit disturbingly, reminiscent of the culture war meme known as Homath. Okay, if you don't know Homath, you gotta check out Homath. Okay, the Infernal tradition therefore does not pigeonhole individuals that invariably check innumerable group identity boxes, nor does it ascribe to the psyop weapon known as collective guilt. Neither does it penalize individuals for their evolutionarily guided penchant for in-group self-sorting practices. On the contrary, the Infernal tradition encourages selective/discriminatory self-sorting as an expression of rational self-interest regarding individual and or what I long ago coined as cultural conservation. Quote, end quote. Cultural conservation. The obvious caveat attached to this disposition is that we are each responsible for living in accord with what the Satanic Bible defines as the modified golden rule. I mentioned it in yesterday's video. I believe it's page 51. So the multiracial infernal order of the left-hand path addressed this theme in the early and mid-1990s via our print media aimed at black American females. The relevant track-turned-magazine article titled Real Black Power challenged the then popular notion of the black Muslim movement identified with the likes of the Nation of Islam and its most famous voice, the late Malcolm X. Thus, for more than a decade preceding the 9/11 attacks on the USA, not going down that rabbit hole, we could, but this not going to happen today. Okay, thus, for more than a decade preceding the 9/11 attacks on the USA, the Infernal tradition was already openly opposed to the would-be international perils of both theocratic Islam and all instantiations of Marxist socioeconomic philosophy, formally known as dialectic materialism. It is in that spirit, then, that I present this explanatory preamble to the June 15th, 2026 YouTube video by Brandon Lehman, Lehman spelled Lehman, titled Black America Got a Painful Reality Check, which is attached to my blog form of this June 16th presentation titled Satanic Pluralism versus Marxist Diversity, published at my William Gidney Substack and Medium writing platforms. Okay, at the very moment of this, it is at Medium. It will be going to Substack next. Again, I've not been feeling well, but this was kind of what I was trying to say in the beginning. But again, I'm a little blurry-eyed because of not feeling well, and I wanted to mention those blog written format social media platforms that I have. If you are like me and you are a reader, and particularly if you're like me and you are a reader and a writer, then you're going to value something like that. That's where I get to things concisely. Yes, that means I do leave out my margin notes, as it were, and here I'm going to add some of those, but they both have their pros and cons. Okay. For audiences simply watching or listening to my on-screen spoken delivery of the cited essay, the referenced video is presented by an anti-communist black American patriot that is not an Infernal initiate. He is not affiliated with us in any way, okay? I'm just like his video. Therein, he poignantly treats the menace of contemporary communism as a divide-and-conquer Trojan horse infecting the thoughts and behaviors of black Americans, non-whites, and even whites around the globe as a self-immolating, big lie, race-based psyop. PSYOP again. I don't think I mentioned it today, but I did mention it yesterday. Military speak for psychological operations. Okay, so although he correctly informs his audience that the global population has arguably been systematically propagandized to either unnecessarily adopt a white guilt complex or bigoted anti-white racist disposition, and that the notion that only Caucasians are purportedly capable of presenting socially deleterious racism is an irrational myth. I would like to now cross some of his T's and dot some of his I's. He did a great job, by the way. You need to see his video. And this is just me. This is me crossing T's and dotting I's. Okay, I'm a little older than he is. I've probably been following this kind of thing longer than he has, and from a multidisciplinary approach. So, he did a great job. I'm just bringing a little more to the picnic, Okay, so he rightly notes that China is linguistically deemed to be the central form of humanity and culture on the planet. It is actually well established that most, if not all, geographically established indigenous peoples likewise etymologically refer to themselves by their historical name so as to be translated as something akin to the people or the humans. This includes diverse subsets of humanity such as Native Americans, Native American tribes, and ancient Hebrews. I didn't write this, but for context, I know because there's so much anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitic Jew hatred right now. Politics is fine, but, lumping everybody in the same group, lumping individuals based on their group identity into a particular box one way or another, I'm not okay with that, as we explain here. But because of that popularity right now, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the terms goy or goyim, which I've known for decades because I just would know these kinds of things. But most of you probably had never heard of this kind of thing until fairly recent history. And I mention this simply to say, if you're going to look at it from a bigoted point of view or just a small-minded point of view, you'll say, look at those terrible Jews. They're calling everybody in their out-group goyim, cattle, animals, right? But okay, so let me just say again here. Let me start here again because this is a very important point. Linguistic anthropology. I'm ad-libbing here again. Linguistic anthropology is one of my many passions. Not that I'm an expert, just one of my many passions. I'll read books on it and watch documentaries on it or that kind of thing. Read articles, and we can just learn so much about the human condition by understanding language and the migration of language and how that affects, because we think linguistically. So if you're going to look at it from a neuropsychological point of view, especially when you come from my disposition of field theory, so and that consciousness is fundamental. A lot of that starts to make sense within the terms of words of power and the logos. It's occultism, baby. It's occultism, Okay, so let me back up. So the gentleman I referred to, Mr. Lehman, Brandon Lehman, he rightly notes that China is linguistically deemed to be the central form of humanity and culture on the planet. It is actually well established that most, if not all, geographically established indigenous peoples likewise etymologically refer to themselves by their historical name, so it wouldn't be like Native American and be like, the Apache, right? That kind of thing. Okay. But most people, the name that they refer to themselves is like as an American, and doesn't come from the United States, but it comes from ancient Rome, the Germani, the men of war, the people of war. We call them Germans, and we call that land Germany. But that's not what they call themselves. They call themselves Die Deutschen, and they call their nation, their land, Deutschland. So the names that ancient peoples typically, if not universally, had for themselves when translated is comprehensible as basically the people or the humans. Now, it's this counterpoint here, this other side of the coin, that's so very important that I'm trying to emphasize here. This includes diverse subsets of humanity, such as Native American tribes and ancient Hebrews. Likewise, then, those outside of their particular ethnic enclave, even if they looked precisely like themselves, were known by epithets defining them in what we would translate today as terms like the others, subhuman, Untermenschen, and animals. Tieren? Ich vergessen. I haven't used German in a very long time, people. So you don't bust my balls, applaud me for remembering anything. Okay. So use it or lose it, people. Use it or lose it. All right, so Brandon Lehman also accurately denounces the dishonest talking point of cultural Marxists that alleges that racism and slavery are cultural attributes exclusively associated with white people. Evil white people, the blue-eyed devil. I have blue eyes, and I am the devil. Uh-oh. I have to recontemplate that. All right. He tackles the nonsense that racism and slavery are cultural attributes exclusively associated with white people, including smartasses like myself, and white culture. Doing so, he notes that China and at least some Middle Eastern and or African nations still view others as racially beneath them and or engage in the international crime of slavery. So, as for the buzzword slavery itself, it is derived from the fact that so many Eastern European Slavs were enslaved by Islamic and or African invaders that the numbers are well known to far surpass the sums related to the North Atlantic slave trade involving Africans displaced to the Americas. Moreover, well over 70% of African slaves were sent to modern-day Brazil in South America, and most of the others were scattered throughout the Caribbean islands, with only a small fraction of the difference arriving in the USA. Those that did reach North America were owned exclusively in the southern states by an even tinier fraction of the southern populace. Oh, and I didn't add this here, but let me mention, also, we've had a couple of really large immigration periods in the United States, the 1860s being one of them and 1880s being another, following the U.S. Civil War in the 1860s. Then in the early 20th century, that's when we get the big boom of like the Italians and that kind of thing. You get the whole Godfather saga, arriving here on the boats and Ellis Island and all that kind of thing. Okay, so whether they came from Germany or Poland or Italy or wherever they came from in the European continent or the United Kingdom, those people by the millions, and they've had lots of babies, especially, say, like the Irish Catholics, right? The Irish Catholics making babies, people. Like Monty Python, Every Sperm is Sacred. Have you ever seen the movie and the video from the movie? Anyway, if you haven't, you have to check it out. Every Sperm is Sacred, Monty Python. Okay, those people who procreated in large numbers and came here in large numbers, they had nothing to do with the slave trade, and the slave trade was only relevant to an infinitesimal segment of the population here to begin with. So when we talk about this nonsense about reparations and all that garbage, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Not to mention all the interbreeding. I have a lot of relatives that are Puerto Rican, Mexican, black, half. You know what I'm saying? They're mixed. So which part pays reparations and which parts receive reparations for those who are black? That's an interesting question. So we can go down this rabbit hole a long, long time. But also, how about the simple fact of the hundreds of thousands of white American Northerners who lost their lives in the Civil War, not the War for Independence. So if I said something quickly and made a mistake, I apologize for that. So not the War of Independence from the United Kingdom, but in the Civil War. I don't know. Paid in blood people. Ever heard the phrase? Ever heard the term? And then, I'm sorry, but I am 100% against the whole gosh darn it, the legal phrase, the political phrase is escaping me at the moment. But the 1960s nonsense, where we're just gonna have handouts to everybody. Okay, so we have intergenerational parasites living off the government housing, government cheese, government paycheck, Obama phone. I don't know. See people that have never had a job, not only in their whole life, but their daddy's life, their mama's life, their granddaddy's life, their grandmama's life, their kid's life, blah, blah, blah. But they got lots of gold toofuses and gold jewelries and all that kind of thing. And they're all going to be big rap stars or basketball stars and, that kind of thing. All right. So how much welfare and how much blood pays for the reparations, especially to some of these facts we're about to get here in a moment. Okay, now of course this doesn't apply to rational good people, which there are plenty, like this gentleman, Brandon Lehman. Again, I am an iconoclast. I don't play by your rules. You can't put me in that corner, and I will offend you. I will offend you because your offense cracks me up. All right, so those that did reach North America were owned exclusively in the southern states, as I said, by an even tinier fraction of the southern populace, must be remembered. Other North American owners of African slaves and or their descendants included Native Americans and more than 10,000 free black residents of the original colonies and their states. So let's back up for a moment. Okay, I know, I don't know, maybe 15, 20, 25 years ago, I think there was some news, as I recall, about... So, of course, there's interbreeding, especially when slavery is involved. Not that it happens universally, but it does happen, of course. And there was some issues, I can't remember off the top of my head, but anyway, I think Native American nations are not compelled by law to recognize the descendants of that slavery, which then, of course, burns the backside of some of the mixed black American descendants, who want to identify with those nations, those tribes, for one reason or another, like Pocahontas, Elizabeth Warren, who's white. So I forget the specifics, so forgive me. I'm probably butchering the heck out of it. But the point is, Native Americans, not all of them, not every tribe, but plenty of them owned African or African-descended slaves. Additionally, as I noted here, approximately 10,000 free black residents of the original colonies and their states also owned black slaves. Yes, you heard me right. Here in North America, blacks owned blacks as slaves. And as I'll note here, although some of those black slave owners purchased select slaves to set them free, the historical record is replete with examples of free blacks that purchased black slaves to serve their socioeconomic designs as slave labor no differently than the enterprises pursued by white plantation slavers. So, that is highly significant history there, people. Okie dokie. It has often been noted by duly informed social commentators that ethnocentric, xenophobic, culture, and or race-based animus are not attributes unique to white civilization, but are instead historically and unmistakably still universally rampant among all racial groups around the world. Pertinently, it was not white civilization that created or even systematized the commercial industry of human trafficking. That's something I've heard recently too. It was like, oh well, even if white people didn't invent slavery, they systematized it. They industrialized it. Like, okay, so if you're not damned because of sunset, you're damned because of sundown. It's always something, right? Okay. Pertinently, it was not white civilization that created or even systematized the commercial industry of human trafficking, nor does it appear that so-called modern white societies are proliferating such a practice. On the contrary, it was the white Western civilization that abolished human slavery and attempted to enforce that abolition as a matter of international law in no small part, due to the biblical view that all humans are scripturally said to be created equally before the sight of their collective creator. And I am fairly certain I'm correct, but I apologize if I am incorrect, but I will add this. It is my belief off of the top of my head that Russia had abolished serfdom even prior to the U.S. abolition of its slavery. Now, of course, unless I'm missing something, it would be serfdom was a Russian on Russian practice, but a rose by any other name is still a rose, and so Russian serfdom is not or was not but slavery. And I think off the top of my head that they abolished serfdom even before the U.S. abolished its slave laws. So, if I'm right, interesting little bit of history. If I'm wrong, forget I said anything. I need one of those flashy things from that Will Smith movie, the Alien movie. Anyway, okay, rather than the myth, the flashy thing that wipes out your memory is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so rather than the myth that white men systematically captured Africans for commercial purposes, popularized in the faux familial history proffered in the movie Roots by the co-writer of the autobiography of Malcolm X, Alex Haley, the truth is far different. Even to me, the wording there is a little odd. Okay, so the story of Roots that became the miniseries TV show, I believe it was the 70s. I know I was a kid. I was a kid as a boy, and it was supposedly the family history of Alex Haley, and I can't remember if it was based on a book, and that maybe he even did the screenplay. I don't remember. But yeah, he's the author of that notion, that story. Okay, and then he, in addition to that, I should say, so the autobiography of Malcolm X by Malcolm X, right, as told to Alex Haley because he was a writer. And I believe Malcolm X was a writer too for their newspaper, right? Okay, at any rate, as told to Alex Haley. So it is my understanding, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain I am correct. It is my understanding that eventually Alex Haley was called out on the lack of historical correctness, the lack of factual. He didn't cross his T's and dot his I's historically, and it's my understanding he was called out on that. And then so his retort was something to the effect of, "Well, it's in the spirit of what happened to my family, not precisely the letter of what happened." And so, yeah, that seems like a convenient malarkey to me. So, as I said, the truth appears to be far different than the fiction, the proposed nonfiction. So even where the African setting was highlighted by Haley as the purported origin story of his family's journey to the USA, history credibly informs us that it was far more common for competing African tribes to capture one another for such human trafficking ventures. Certainly, that conduct is consistent with the likes of the African warlord Hannibal and his excursions into Europe, as well as the campaigns therein from its eastern flank by the Ottoman Empire. I didn't include in my essay, but I will note here that I've read from biased and then seemingly unbiased sources over the decades a great deal of information about not only Africans capturing and enslaving one another, and not strictly as a matter of warfare. Also, although it did include warfare as well, but just as slave trade practices. I've read plenty of material and encountered plenty of documentary material that implicates Middle Eastern slavers and Jewish middlemen, financiers, moneymen, bankers involved with this. Now, I think that's important as a matter of historical fact, if indeed it is a relevant fact, and I cannot independently verify that now, but it's a fact of it's an argument that I've encountered many times in both print and documentary sources, and again, reputable sources as well as stuff we might take with a pinch of salt, but that kind of stuff can be easily weaponized for propaganda against both of those populations, and that's not my intent here, but it is my intent to footnote it as a viable possibility, at least in part, as a debunking of the complete ahistorical myth that white people were just hunting black people willy-nilly. We just left Birmingham, England, and Frankfurt and wherever else, Brussels and Belgium, and said, let's go hunting in the wilds of Africa, and then we'll take them to Connecticut, or land in the eastern seaboard or whatever, and then take them down to Alabama and sell them. I mean, just there are reports that some of that happened. I don't deny that some of that happened. I can't independently verify or disqualify that as an historical reality. But the vast sum of reputable information from our historians is that it is not the popularized idea of it that was promulgated to us by Alex Haley with Roots and similar garbage. Okay, so it is therefore evocative to note that Malcolm X himself came to believe after his pilgrimage to Mecca that all races could transcend racial animus if they all converted to Islam. Well, ain't that convenient? Okay, so of course the same can be said of Christianity or even contemporary religious Satanism. I mean, and frankly, let's just say here, but then where is the precious diversity that cultural Marxists claim to support? Because that's part of the goal, or at least stated goal or understood goal of international communism, right? If we're all on the same page, there's no class difference, there's no oppressor or oppressed, and blah blah blah, all that stuff. We can go down that rabbit hole, and now we're all the same, so there's no division, there's no animus between us as distinct identities, because we're all cogs in the machine, we're all spokes in the wheel, and the wheel is the proletariat, right? Dictatorship of the people. Yeah, just dictatorship. Again, the same can be said of Christianity or even contemporary religious Satanism or communism or just about any ideology we can drum up. We can make the spaghetti monster, the flying spaghetti monster, that fake religion that was sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing years ago. I mean, we can have world peace in the name of that. Where does your individuality go? Where does the creativity? Where does the human spirit go when you're ground into dust, so that we're all identical little specks of dust in the heap of dust, the dust pile, right? The dust bin. We become a dust bunny monster. Okay, but then where is the precious diversity that cultural Marxists claim to support? Obviously, communism is an evangelical missionary religion of the state that we are expected to adopt either by faith or by force, and in that context is the perilous twin of jihadist theocratic Islamism. So, someone and I discussed recently whether or not Islamism is a word, and I made the argument that language is fluid. Every year, the Oxford English Dictionary itself omits words and adds words, and then and it's outside of the OED as well, but that's a famous, well-known example of it. So there we go. Language is fluid, people, and Islamism, even if it didn't exist last week, is a word that applies specifically to theocratic Islam. Now, it's it's an argument to be made, and I think reasonably so, that Islam is inherently theocratic. But historically, we could have made the same argument at different times, say, about Christianity or Judeo-Christianity. And so now it's Christianity or Judeo-Christianity a la carte, right? So, so I don't know if it's possible for Islam to ever become moderated and become something that exists within a pluralistic society. I have great reservations about that particular pipe dream, but never say never. So I'm just playing devil's advocate there, and just trying to give you both sides of the coin so that we have full disclosure. And although I have my pet theories and my own biases, I do want to at least be a rational-minded, even-keeled person that's looking at everything and considering those possibilities, or else, we just engage in confirmation bias. So, such reasons address why the U.S. Marines are known as leathernecks, and why pre-Bolshevik Revolution communists openly called to weaponize black Americans against white Americans. Firstly, ships were so routinely attacked by Muslim pirates that slashed the throats of the supposed infidel crewmen that what we know as the modern Marine took to donning a leather neck protector akin to a contemporary bulletproof vest to act as a shield against such a would-be beheading. Ireland, anyone? So that's where we get the name leathernecks. Secondly, in 1912, Israel Cohen wrote the following in A Racial Program for the 20th Century. This is a communist speaking now. A communist. This is not me. This is not the normal Western mentality. This is a Western communist. Israel Cohen in 1912. We must realize that our party's most powerful weapon is racial tension. By propounding into the consciousness of the dark races that for centuries they have been oppressed by the whites, we can mold them to the program of the Communist Party. In America, we will aim for subtle victory. While inflaming the Negro minority against the whites, we will endeavor to instill in the whites a guilt complex for their exploitation of the Negroes. We will aid the Negroes to rise in prominence in every walk of life, in the professions, and in the world of sports and entertainment. With this prestige, the Negro will be able to intermarry with the whites and begin a process which will deliver America to our cause. End quotation. The foregoing quotation was actually read into the congressional record in 1957 by Congressman Thomas Gersel Abernathy, a Democrat representing Mississippi, and can be found there on page 8,559. I got it myself personally in a book that I have, but I have also pulled it up on the internet and verified its existence, so I can independently verify that, and that at least it exists in the cyberspace as as further confirmation. I would like to say, so I would like to say that it's easy to say, well, who cares what some commie wrote in a book in 1912? And who cares about some politician that read it into the congressional record in 1957? Those are fair questions or statements calling into question the veracity of that here in 2026. I do not deny that. So if you're going to pose such a counterpoint, I'm going to respond this way. The above asserted Communist Action Plan is entirely consistent with what the former Soviet Union's KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov explained about the process of psychologically demoralizing the American-led post-World War II population vis-a-vis an extended and relentless PSYOP culture war. I think that we can fairly say, I'm not disrespecting black people who are in prominent positions. I mean, I like many people, I think our best Supreme Court justice in the U.S. is Justice Thomas. So, okay, I grew up in the area of Michael Jackson at a time when he was like the biggest thing in the world. And Michael Jackson's music's awesome. He was a great entertainer in lots of ways, blah, 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 blah. We can go down the list, right? So again, I'm not knocking good people, talented people. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that's the mentality, the Machiavellian tactical and strategic mentality of divide and conquer, the politics of fear and manipulation of communism. And so I would say, versus the world of 1912, the world of 2026, That seems to be a fait accompli. No, that's an accomplished thing. And rather than that bringing people together, like the internet was supposed to bring people together, that in many ways has divided us along racial lines more than ever. And I would say the internet's divided us along interpersonal lines more than ever. So I'm not knocking the racial harmony thing. I'm knocking using integration as a weapon of division. Okay, so that is itself reminiscent of Abraham Lincoln's warning that the American Union could never be toppled by an external force engaged in traditional warfare, but would only collapse from within by a populace no longer devoted to the ideal of what was once internationally coveted and celebrated as the American dream. One common theme exploited as a demoralization campaign within the USA and to taint its reputation among the other nations is to misrepresent the fact that the U.S. Constitution originally counted enslaved black people as 60%, i.e., 3/5 of a person. Established by the 1787 Constitutional Convention, this 3/5 compromise determined how enslaved populations were factored into state totals for congressional representation and taxation. The reality is that the Founding Fathers were embattled in their efforts to establish a new nation comprised of those in favor of slave labor and those opposed to it, ideally, even if not pragmatically, for their own situational socioeconomic gain and or benefit. Long understood as an incremental stepping stone, this ridiculously controversial compromise was actually only scandalous due to its historical divergence from the acceptance of slavery as a cultural norm around the planet. Replacing that concept was the then somewhat radical proposition that slaves in general, and the African-based slaves in North America in particular, were at all worthy of being counted as a human being in relation to any governmental calculation whatsoever. It was a constitutional crack in the dam that would eventually burst open as the outright abolition of slavery within the USA. With that liberating result, the 14th Amendment clause regarding so-called birthright citizenship was established to enshrine the principle of equal protection under the laws for the American offspring and further descendants of Africa originating slave laborers. This is why it is so vital that Congress presently amend it so as to abolish its current abuse involving the subversive commercial industry of anchor babies. Okay. Relevantly, most are ignorant of the fact that the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is the codified abolition of all so-called conditions of servitude outside of the scope of imprisoned felons. In addition to former Vice President Kamala Harris unlawfully retaining California inmates as that state's Attorney General and imperiling them by compelling them to battle wildfires as slave laborers, there is also the little-known fact that even World War II German prisoners of war were held as slave laborers in North America as late as the 1950s. Alternately stated, the U.S. government enslaved white Germans after convicting them for alleged war crimes as a consequence of failing to win the war that decimated the German population, industry, and national topography. Such is war. War is hell. I say that sardonically, but let's face it, it's true, and nobody should be praying for war. So, as for the intentionally inflammatory phrase racism, that too is a misnomer exploited by postmodern cultural Marxists. Brandon Lee deftly highlights this educational error in historicity, but there is a finer point to be made. As the Indian immigrant and conservative intellectual media mogul Dinesh D'Souza astutely specifies in his 1995 book, The End of Racism, although what we today recognize as racism, in its visceral incarnation, was historically and culturally universal around the world, it was a white culture that attempted to scientifically study, understand, and quantify it. To split hairs and rely upon this anomaly in the pursuit of knowledge as the sole criteria for what defines racial essentialism and race-based bigotry, social disenfranchisement, and/or violence, murder, and even justification for contemporary calls for white genocide, or any racial genocide, demonstrates precisely why Anton LaVey defined the first satanic sin as stupidity. Adding here, not in the writing, so LaVey pointed out, ignorance is one thing. You can overcome ignorance with diligence and curiosity, right? Stupidity is a different animal altogether. Moreover, this is why LaVey and even the conservative Jewish scholar Dennis Prager have both argued that their respective religions are concerned with ethics rather than ethnic factors. Further, prior to the publication of The God Gene, LaVey opined that there is a genetic component to being born a Satanist, a notion that has resulted in the concept of the satanic milieu as a meta-tribe. In other words, a transtemporal and transnational monoculture recognizable in our multicultural human population. In accordance with field theory of physics, the evolutionary studies regarding human perception of reality by Dr. Donald Hoffman, and the pioneering hypothesis argued even half a century ago by the esteemed French computer scientist and ufologist Jacques Vallée, a well-known friend of the late Anton LaVey, it reasonably appears that the biological model pertaining to human characteristics and the human genome, as well as space-time itself, are both superfluously outdated scientific theories. For a brief overview and editorialization on that theme, please see the 23-minute YouTube video on the Leto Files channel from May 25th, 2026, titled "The UFO Control System is Invisible. Here's Why. Vallée was on to something." For a much deeper investigation on the same overarching concept, make time to at least listen to the hour-and-a-half November 28, 2025 interview on the Essentia Foundation YouTube channel called "Dennis Noble, Neo-Darwinism is Dead. We Need a Biology Beyond Genes." By the way, in the published written version of this, currently on medium.com, and later tonight or tomorrow to be on Substack as well, the videos are there. I'm new to Substack, so I can't guarantee that. I'm going to work on that. Medium, definitely these videos are there, as well as Brandon Lehman's videos. So in the writing, I want to give due credit and traffic to those source materials. So please check them out if they're of interest to you. They're certainly of interest to me. Avatars of contemporary religious Satanism, to include infernal initiates, are arguably immune from what Dr. Gadsad refers to as the parasitic mind virus. But we are not magically safe from the consequences of such a potentially violent communist psyop. As Dr. Donald Hoffman reminds us regarding the apparent reality that consciousness is fundamental and that physicalism is rubbish, our reality nonetheless has laws with rewards and consequences no conceptually different than that of an avatar portrayed in what we identify as a video game. So your avatar in a video game, you know, if it's like a combat game or it's a race game and you get run over by another race car or something, that's your avatar dies, at least for that time, or maybe that's your last life. You know, you got multiple lives, and then it's game over, right? Okay, so whatever this simulacrum is, whatever this simulation is, whatever this matrix is, you know, whatever this consciousness is fundamental is, whatever that means, there are rules to it. So, you know, it's like, so what if it's all field theory and it's all this? And it's like, yeah, well, this is our reality now. And pain, as much as we understand it, our pain is real. Emotional pain, physical pain, death, etc. Now, death is not the end of things, but that's not a rabbit hole we're going to go down now. Just know information theory, quantum physics, Kirlian photography, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so whatever that may indicate in relation to our existential quest for the meaning of life, it is no immaterial trifle to disregard. There must be a great awakening that, in part, puts an end to this communist platform of divide and conquer politics of fear. And although infernal initiates do not have the anti-other religions disposition of other sectarian Satanists, we also do not actually care if anyone else survives the game. We are solely concerned with winning our own game of life and take issue with all of the nihilistic gamers and or NPCs, i.e. non-player characters, overpopulating the game system and tipping the balance of the game toward a very unsatisfying status of game over. This is, after all, a sort of game of civilization, and the nihilistic, multiracial, own nothing and be happy leftists are definitely the bad guys. So, if you've seen the movie The Matrix, you can die in the Matrix, but then, you can die in the Matrix and then die outside of the Matrix. But it's also possible to survive it. But it depends on the level of your injury, right? Just like if you fall down from one set of variables in our real world, you can survive it and even just pop right back up. Or frankly, seemingly the exact same fall could also be the end of you or cause for serious injury. There's a lot of these types of movies. Rizwan Virk mentions in his book some of the titles, so do several other people. But the one not very long ago that streamed 2 or 3 years ago, I think it's called Bliss. That shows like a situation where sort of like in a laboratory setting, like in Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I guess even that remake they made X amount of years ago. I know I saw it. I don't remember a thing about it, but the remake. So Total Recall. In both those situations, you're like sitting in an office or commercial office or a laboratory setting, and they hook up their whatever's to you, and then your consciousness sort of drops into this simulated world, and then so you physically exist somewhere else, but your consciousness and your avatar is there. So you're like the video game player. There's all kinds of theories about this. I don't know that I'm real. How do I know that I'm not AI? I mean, sincerely, that sounds ridiculous on its face until you evaluate current science and the philosophical and spiritual ramifications of it. Or let's say, like in The Matrix, there's the lady in the red dress and all the NPCs, all the non-real characters. They're just there, right? They're just the filler to make the game more interesting and populated or whatnot. So how do I know? Perhaps maybe I'm real, and maybe I'm like in Total Recall. This is a vacation for me, or it's something like Bliss or The Matrix or any number of other films. But here I am. My consciousness projected from some whatever external existence there is, and my avatar is here, and then everyone else is an NPC. Everyone else is a non-player character. And then if you think of the movie Blade Runner by Philip K. Dick's original book, Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, something like that. So Decker, the detective, the sci-fi noir detective, played by Harrison Ford in the original film, because I think they did a remake of that too. He tracks down rogue AI and he eliminates them, he exterminates them. I think it's called retiring them. He retires them. But throughout the film, he and the female character too, by Sean something or another, they come to terms, or they struggle with whether or not they themselves are AI. And I know he looks at this picture of his childhood. And so, long story short, there's this whole backstory of you've been downloaded, right? Just like a video game. Now, I was never into video games, but I've seen people show them to me. And it's like, oh, this is this character's backstory and that kind of thing. So how do I know that my childhood in the 70s and the 80s and all those things that I remember and everything that I've lived, how do I know that it's just not a program? We can't know that. So again, whatever this reality is, it's a reality that has rules, and those rules come with rewards and consequences. How dire those consequences may be, I don't know, because video games have different. You can have multiple lives. You can have a single life. We have film expressions of this, like I just went down, naming several. those possibilities, we don't know how dire, but we do know that, like games and like a character in a film, that fantasy world, that simulated world of fiction or play, is one that's governed by rules. Those rules come with rewards and consequences. And it's amazing to me that anybody could sell communism on the younger generation, or Islam. They say, well, Islam means peace. No, Islam does not mean peace. Islam means peace through submission. And just like I explained earlier, I'm sure we can all have uniformity and kumbaya if we all do the same thing under compulsory consequences. Die by the sword, conversion by the sword. That's not freedom. That's not life. That's not freedom. That's not godly. All right, I lost my train of thought. Point being, Oh yeah, I know what I was saying. Communism is responsible for, the estimates are like 120, 150, 160 million dead. The Soviet Union killing its own people. Cambodia is killing fields, killing its own people. Germany, Nazi Germany being socialism. Socialism is, you vote yourself into socialism, but you shoot your way out, and communism, is the other brand of it. What they say, socialism is the theory, communism is the practice, which is funny because then these new neo-socialists like, oh, socialism has never really been tried. Really? Well, it's actually a socialist communist saying that, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. How many millions of eggs? Assuming that, let's say we're all conscious beings, AI or otherwise, and all our feelings are real and all our backstories are real, and this, even if this is some sort of 3D projection on a 2D surface or holographic, whatever it is, let's assume those are lives, and that in this realm those consequences have some sort of dire ramifications. How many eggs do we have to break to have an omelet? So no, it has been tried. It has failed everywhere it's been instituted, and that's why people in this country that have come from those nations, are so opposed to that, and that's why, especially in the last couple of election cycles, they've sided with the side that's voting against socialism and communism in this country. But it's one side of this political argument, and I know they use politics to divide. The ethereal I know politics is a divide and conquer game. I realize that. Okay, but the people who are driving these so-called divisions on the foot soldier side, the electorate, the people who live with the consequences in daily life on the ground, us plebes, us proles, okay? We have a division, a demarcation line, where there's one side that is prone to violence. There's one side that is prone to trickery and criminality and fakery to win and take control, and then use control to subjugate the other that thinks differently than them. And as I've said before, and on yesterday's video and in other places, I'm aware of the brand of Satanism that is socialist Satanism. Okay, there's all kinds of forms of Satanism historically and in contemporary religious Satanism. I have never ascribed to that brand of Satanism, and it is anathema to my philosophical worldview, which is rather lengthy in a historical and artistic and literary reference point, which is consistent with my worldview of meritocracy and of doing the best that you can in a hierarchical existence to win the game. But there certainly has been and currently is a socialist brand of Satanism, but it's that brand of socialism that I believe infects Satanism, and it poisons it, and it's that brand, it's socialism in and of itself that I believe is destroying our neighborly ways of coexistence within Western society and possibly outside of that. And so, again, whatever game this may be, whatever this is, there is one side that is using the tool, in legal Latin, tools of interim, the tools of terror, to win. And that includes, historically has included, or at least our backstory program has included horrific hellish genocide, and not only of the other outside of one's national boundaries, but the other within. And before you say that they go, for the dissidents and things like that, which of course they do, right? They start with the people closest to them, whether it's Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. And again, Nazi Germany, as I started to say, it's the theory and communism is the practice, but Nazi Germany was not only responsible for millions dead in World War II, but there is the Holocaust, which was not only aimed at Jewish people, which is horrific enough, but it was Protestants, it was Jehovah's Witnesses, it was homosexuals, it was gypsies, the Romani, it was various political I don't want to say political dissidents, but oppositional political voices, and then what we might consider real dissidents, right? But that being said, there's an old phrase that old saying that socialism and communism is cannibalistic. It always eats its own, and that's a parasite. When people say like a quote-unquote fetus, a baby in the womb, an unborn child, a preborn child, is a parasite. No, because statistically, a fetus, a child in the womb, does not murder the host. That is a rare medical complication. Again, emphasis on the word rare and emphasis on the word complication, medical complication. A parasite feeds upon its host until it expires, kills, terminates the host, and then feeds upon itself and destroys itself. That's a parasite, and that's socialism and communism. And so, even though consciousness is fundamental from the infernal tradition point of view, from the ideological point of view that I've always taught or have long taught as a theosophical, theological, philosophical worldview of Satanism, of contemporary religious Satanism from this tradition, communism and socialism are ideologically incompatible with our theosophy. So there you go, people. I'm going to tell you to, people of the internet, go do some devil stuff and have yourself a fine day, and pray for me that I feel better, because I have felt like crap for about 2 weeks now. So see you later, alligator.
Warning. The system has become unstable.